Joining me now here on another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show with the Knicks continuing their road trip to wrap up 2023. We head to the Sunshine State, specifically the Magic Kingdom, to take on one of the bigger success stories in the NBA so far this season. We went from one success story in the Thunder, and now we go to Orlando to see how the Magic are doing these days. And joining me from the Blue Wire Podcast Network and 1/3 of one of my favorite niche NBA podcasts that I've run into throughout these pregame pods, it's Kevin Tucker of the Sixth Man Show. Kevin, welcome to the Knicks Film School Podcast.
Andrew, thanks for having me. This will be a lot of fun. Yeah, it's been an interesting start to the Magic season, a little bit of a surprise, and looking forward to talking with you about that and about this Knicks matchup on Friday.
So I want to start with the positive, because I know the recent 7-game stretch hasn't been the greatest, and we'll obviously talk about what's happened during that stretch. But between the win streak that shot them up to the top 2 or 3 seed in the East for a while, and the revelation that the defense was, and like the Jalen Suggs of it all, like the Magic got off to a start that a lot of people outside of Orlando were enjoying, and I'm sure inside Orlando was even more exciting. Can you just give us a bit of a behind the scenes, or I guess a first person perspective view of how the vibes are or were in Orlando during that stretch?
Yeah, it was certainly a surprise, even for those of us who've been around this team for a long time. You know, last season, the Magic had a bit of a mixed bag as far as, how the season went and how that projected going into this season. The Magic started really slow, 5-20 last season. However, we were just decimated with injuries throughout those first 25 games. I mean, literally there was a nine-game stretch, Andrew, where we didn't have a point guard. First, second, third string, even our G League, like our two-way point guard was injured. We were throwing all kinds of guys, leading the offense. Anyway, it was a mess. But however, after those first 25 games, this team was over 500 last season. So Magic fans coming into this season had pretty decent expectation for this team. Not great. Like, if you're asking me, I expected 42 wins. That was my projection on the season. So right around that 500 mark, right around that play-in area. So for this team to get off to what ended up being a 14-5 start, 16-7, whatever you want to choose, certainly surprised all of us, and it was a lot of fun. But you're right, they did it with defense, and the defense has still been good, even though the last 10 games or so has not been good for this team as far as record goes. The defense is still kind of the strong point of this team. Offensively, it's always going to be a struggle. This is not a team that shoots the ball well, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. But as far as the good for this season, it's been Paolo, who's been great. Franz Wagner has been mostly good, though inconsistent. And the big thing for this team, when they're winning, it's their bench, actually. The second unit for the Magic has been terrific. Again, through the first 20 games or so, they were really good. The last 10 games has been a bit of a mess. But yeah, the bench unit has been a big part of this team's success. And so, yeah, those guys, Paolo, Franz, the bench, the defense, that's kind of been what has led to this surprising, 18-12 start.
So you mentioned the 18-12 of it all compared to the 14-9. I actually took it to the 16-7 mark of the season because it was still technically 9 games over. 2-5 in their last 7. I sorted the NBA advanced metric stats by since that the last 7 games. So overall, Orlando is for those paying attention at home, they're 11th in net rating, still 5th in defense, but they're 21st in offense, which speaks to what you're talking about. That their calling card is still defense. They're not really going to try and outscore you. They're going to try and make sure you score less than them, which Knicks fans will remember from the first year of the Tibbs era. That was how the Knicks won games. It was a top 5 defense and a bottom 10 offense. And it seems as if the Magic are following that formula over this stretch of 7 games. Now, granted, it's 2 games against the Celtics, 1 game against Milwaukee. So there have been better teams that they've played up against. But during this stretch, it's now the 26th ranked offense and I believe it's the 14th ranked defense, which is a -7 net rating, which obviously leads to the record that they have. Is there any fear in Orlando that, because they can't really depend on the offense to really be that productive, it really is going to fall all on the defense, and how sustainable that is? That if the defense is any hint of an off night, we're kind of screwed.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly it. This team lives and dies. The old phrase, live and die by the 3. This team has no 3, so ignore that. This team lives and dies by the defense. You're exactly right. And it's so interesting because this team, just lacks shots from distance. Like we cannot, I mean, I think we're like 29th or something like that in the league, shooting from distance, which in this era of NBA basketball is not great. That's a recipe for a disaster.
Real quick. Yeah. 28th, technically.
28, there it is.
A few teams behind them are Memphis, which is going to to be better now. Maybe better now that Ja's back,
and probably Detroit, right?
And Detroit.
Yeah, how did I know?
At the bottom of the league and everything. So,
yeah, exactly.
Continue.
Yeah, so yeah, just not a good company to be around down there. Which again speaks to how well they're playing in basically every other aspect of the game. The fact that they're 6 games over 500 and yet are in that kind of category when it comes to the long ball. So yeah, this team, and we have nights like this where we try to, some odd reason, we try to pretend we are a 3-point shooting team, and we try to keep up with the Joneses, essentially the team we're playing against that night, where they're launching all these threes and they're making them, and we try to keep up with them, and that always kind of hurts the magic. But yeah, the defense, like I said, for the most part has been really good. But yeah, this stretch has been tough. The good thing about the Magic, and Magic fans kind of have a silver lining about this, is we currently have, I believe, like the 29th easiest remaining schedule, 29th easiest. It's been a tough stretch for the Magic so far. And so, like you mentioned, playing Boston twice, actually 3 times, we beat them the first time, but playing Boston twice recently during this stretch. Milwaukee next week is a really tough week for us. We go out west, but then after that, we'll see how it goes. But I think all in all, Andrew, like to sum it up, I think, obviously we had the hot start. We're coming back down to earth, and somewhere in the middle is probably about where the Magic, probably should fall for the rest of the season. So not a whole lot of panic in Orlando. This was expected. We knew this wasn't, a 14-5, 16-7 type team. So we're just kind of coming back down to maybe a little bit back down to earth, I guess I could say.
Well, first of all, as a fan and I guess a content creator, it would be official title of a team, or for a team that has also had a tough schedule. I empathize with the Magic and the schedule they've had. The Knicks, through 30 games this year, have played 12 at Madison Square Garden. So I recognize the road trips and how difficult this year has been. You mentioned playing Boston and Milwaukee. The Knicks, I don't know if you're aware of this, but they made the play-in tournament. Excuse me, the in-season tournament.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And their reward for making said in-season tournament,
Milwaukee, right?
Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And then you know what their other reward was for playing the consolation game because they lost to Milwaukee?
Was that Boston?
They played Boston.
Yeah,
so it was 2 road games at Milwaukee and at Boston. So the Knicks will be the only team this year outside of the playoffs that will play Milwaukee and Boston.
Wow.
5 times each.
Wow, that's crazy.
So I empathize with the frustrations over a tough schedule to start the year. This may become a drinking game too, but I've said this to a lot of our guests that it's the Knicks. Every team has told me that they've had a tough schedule except the Sixers, who just seem to always play the Pistons or the Wizards or the Hawks or the Spurs every single night. So it's been a tough stretch for everybody except our city of brotherly love. Yeah.
And if I could just add one more thing about like the scheduling quirks, I don't know if it's because of the in-season tournament. Obviously your situation certainly was, but the schedule this year has been so strange. Last night the Magic on Wednesday, we played the Sixers. And so before coming onto the show, I was like, let me see how the Knicks have done against the Sixers this season. And you guys haven't even played your own division rival. Here we are, 2024 is next week. And then another weird thing, like the Magic, our first 8 games this season were against Western Conference teams, 8 games. Like there's just so many strange things I feel like this season, especially with the schedule, but I digress. It's been strange, but yeah, that's crazy. 5 times against the Celtics and Bucks. I do not envy you about that.
I don't like being envied for it either. It's not something we want to be like. I don't wish this on anybody.
Yeah.
Having said that, you get to a certain point in the schedule and I guess you accept the cards. You're delegating a lot of Knicks fans while they have the 10th hardest schedule remaining. There's at least a lot of home games. I mean, again, only 12 games at MSG so far this year that they've played. So we'll see if they can start to dominate at home like they have so far this year. You mentioned the 3-point shooting and how they don't live and die by the 3. I do want to point out, while they're 28th in percentage, they're 29th in field goal 3-point attempts per game. So they're not even taking a ton of threes. The volume's not there. And then they are 13th in field goal percentage. So I think the reason why they're probably where they are in offense is just like the shot diet, which might fit their personnel a little bit differently than other teams. Which, before we get into some specific individual players, I guess because of what the constitution of the team is and what the identity it seems being on the defensive end, like You spoke about your expectations of 42 wins. As far as the Thunder, not the Thunder, we're a Magic podcast. As far as the Magic fan base is concerned, what does a disappointing season look like? What does we failed this year look like for a Magic team that, far as I'm concerned, has exceeded all expectations?
Yeah, certainly has exceeded. I think it's, going forward for the rest of the season, what would be considered a failure, honestly, it's a pretty wide spectrum. It would take a lot to be considered a failure at this point. I mean, ultimately, a failure would be a complete and utter collapse to where you miss out on any postseason basketball at all. That would be the ultimate failure. Like I said, going into this season, we just wanted our young team to just get a taste of the postseason, even if that's the play-in. For me, I was totally content. I don't know if content's the right word, but if that's what ended up happening, the Magic go into the play-in game, they get a one-off chance to play Indiana or Atlanta or whoever it was, preseason. I would be okay with that. And I'm still there, honestly, Andrew. I still don't think this is an 18-12 team. I think we have overperformed. Do I think some of that stuff is sustainable over the course of the season? Sure. But I definitely think we're still going to regress. Like I mentioned, next week, we have a tough road trip coming up next week. I can't imagine we win, that road trip. I think we, probably go 1-3 on that trip or whatever it is. And so this record's going to get worse. So what a failure would be that, a complete and utter collapse to where you miss the play-in. If this team falls all the way down to a play-in spot, to me, that's still a success based on preseason, expectations. That doesn't really change for me. Some people would say, a lot of Magic fans would say, well, we've done this through 30 games. We should be this good for the rest of the season. We should be not even in the play-in consideration. We should be a playoff team. Some Magic fans will say that, and I understand that. But for me personally, if we can just get in the play-in, and again, our young guys, none of these guys have played any kind of meaningful late season basketball. It's never happened for them. And so I personally just want this team to get a taste of it, whether it's one play-in game, two play-in games, a playoff series. That would certainly be good enough for me. And I think they can do that.
I'm a big subscriber to playoff experience mattering, and you kind of have to go through the wars with certain cores, your core needs to experience what playoff basketball is like first and what playoff failure is like first. I don't think there's a example in NBA history outside of Magic in 1980. And that was a very specific Lakers team that had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that won the MVP that year on it. But other than that, there's really no example of a team that isn't battle tested actually winning the title, or at least experiencing a deep playoff run first before you actually climb over the hurdle. So I can understand wanting to get your feet wet first before you have any higher heights for this team. Specifically to the Magic fan base, is there a move that potentially wants to be made? Is there a player that they've circled as you know what, if we just add this guy to the court, then we can really potentially raise the ceiling even higher?
Yeah, it's interesting. Coming into this season, a lot of Magic fans are big Markelle Fultz fans, which I know is strange. To the outside NBA world, Markelle Fultz is just synonymous with injuries, and rightfully so. He's synonymous with being a disappointment, borderline bust. I mean, you could say he's a bust right now. He's the number one overall pick. He hasn't played enough games to even, try to climb out of that label. However, this season has broken the hearts and the wills of a lot of Magic fans when it comes to Markelle Fultz. He's missed, I believe, 22 straight games now with a totally unrelated injury to his, past injuries with knee tendonitis right now. And so while Markelle, we still believe is a very talented player, and we believe he is a fantastic facilitator, a great piece to have around a Paolo and a Franz and all those kinds of things, he's just not been available, And so at some point, most Magic fans want this front office to take a look at that lead point guard spot and probably reevaluate it. Markelle's coming up, on a potential, contract and everything like that. And so if there was a deal to be done, it would be that. I don't think we're going to move on from Jalen Suggs at the 2 guard. While statistically he doesn't, jump off the stat sheet at you, he is the heart and soul of what we've already talked about is the strength of this team, that defense. He is an incredible defender, especially for a third-year player. I think he's going to make several all-defensive teams here in the next 4 or 5 years. He's not going anywhere. Paolo and Franz not going anywhere. The center position is a bit of a mixed bag. It's kind of been by committee this season, again, because of injuries. But that lead guard spot, it's the biggest question mark. We did draft Anthony Black, who has started in Markelle Fultz's absence over those 22 games and has been okay. The thing with Anthony Black is he offers little to no offensive game most nights, although On Tuesday, he did have his career high of 23 and shot the ball really well for the first time. It was kind of a surprise. But once again, just doesn't provide any kind of legit offense. A strong player, he's young, but if I were to pinpoint a spot for that question, Andrew, it would be that point guard position. Do I have a specific player in mind? Not necessarily, but I mean, it's crazy to think we're 6 weeks from the trade deadline, something like that, and so there's definitely a possibility that a move could be made, and if it is, I think it would be for a point guard.
So I thought you'd say the point guard position, and I asked specifically because the Knicks have a point guard in Jalen Brunson and a backup point guard that the entire fan base should be playing more minutes than the current amount of minutes he's been getting in Immanuel Quickley.
Right.
And a lot of people that have been very pro Immanuel Quickley, myself included, have worried that in restricted free agency this upcoming offseason, Orlando could be a team that targets Quickley and is like, you know what? We think there's more meat on the bone than just Jalen Brunson's backup or 22 minutes a game. We think Immanuel Quickley would be perfect in Orlando. Is there any chatter from what you've seen? Has his name come up at all amongst you guys in the 6-man show world or amongst the fan base?
Yeah, he has certainly been one of the names that has come up, in Orlando. Another guy, more likely a more possible like in-season trade move would be like from Washington. I'm having an absolute brain fart. The point guard from Washington,
the Jones brother.
Yes, Tyus Jones. Thank you, Tyus Jones. He was one of the names more recently. Obviously, Washington's a disaster. But as far as offseason, you're exactly right. Quickley has definitely been on the lips of Magic fans, and even on the 6-man show, we've mentioned him as well. The thing again for the Magic is we just have no offense at point guard right now, and Quickley would obviously remedy that very quickly, for lack of a little pun there. But yeah, so I think he's definitely a guy that the Magic could target. Again, I don't necessarily believe that would be something that would happen in season as far as a trade, although maybe you would disagree as far as the Knicks, maybe potentially trading him.
Would depend on what the Knicks are getting back. Right. I got to be totally honest with you. You saying that Jalen Suggs is the anchor of the Magic defense and how much he matters to the team. Yes. I think the player that Knicks fans would be targeting would be a Jalen Suggs, which sounds like is a non-starter.
Yeah, he's pretty close to it, especially this season. His progression offensively has been very interesting. Like, again, he's not going to jump off the stat sheet for you, but his rookie season, I believe he shot 21% from three. Last season, he shot like 31% from three. And this season, I don't know what he was before, after last night's game, but I think he was somewhere around 36, 37%. So again, like it's been that's a legitimate improvement over 2 seasons to jump 15, 16 percentage points. And so with him being able to be at least a league average 3-point shooter, it allows him to stay on the floor more than he was in past seasons. And so defense has never been a question for him. Offense this season is starting to get there. Again, he's going to be open. Paolo, Franz are going to draw, the defense to them. And Jalen so far this season has been as good as he's ever been as far as knocking down the 3 ball. So yeah, Jalen is, I don't want to say he's untouchable, but he's as untouchable as he's ever been. I'll put it that way. Cause defensively, the dude is just, he's the engine. Like he does not quit. Every possession, doesn't matter if we're up 5 in the last 2 minutes or if we're down 20, in the third quarter, the dude just plays 100% all the time. And he is definitely the heart and soul of this team, as far as on the court goes. Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to one of our guys, one of our staffers, Mensa Smith, who's just been on the Jalen Suggs bandwagon since before the season. Yeah. There was a thought before the Magic got off to the start that they got off to that if you were going to trade, literally the Quickley for Suggs thing, it's like if you're not going to extend Immanuel Quickley and prioritize a high impact guy like that, a perfect Tom Thibodeau player would just be like Jalen Suggs. I'd argue, I think the Knicks are at a place where they do need the offense, but like Josh Hart, I think could do a lot of what Jalen Suggs can do, not as to the high ceiling of what Jalen Suggs is on defense, but as far as being that spark plug on that end of the floor. Now, listen, there is a fear that Immanuel Quickley will not be a Knick because the Magic throw him a bag. Do you foresee the Magic making a bigger move than just like, here, let's go get the Knicks backup point guard, which is technically a backup point guard? I think that would be a great move for the Magic personally. Yeah. But do you think that that's how aggressive the Magic would be, or are they just kind of seeing what they have? And I know this is more of an off-season question, but like, is that the trajectory of this team at the moment?
That is that is the question that Magic fans have had all season. Coming into this season, this was very much a prove it year for this roster. We've sat with this roster for, obviously we added Paolo, added Franz in the draft, but as far as the other guys around them, we've sat with this roster for, 2-3 seasons now, haven't made any significant moves. Literally the only move we made this offseason was our 2 draft picks and signing Joe Ingles. That's literally all we did. We've sat with the same team. And so we knew coming into the season that it was going to be a prove it year for many guys on this roster. As far as a big splash goes, the thing that at least myself and many Magic fans are, have kind of put this thought in our brain, like this team is not going to win a title this year, obviously not next year, but we're looking ahead. Like the fact that Paolo is 21 and Franz is 22, we are looking 5 years ahead. Like we don't want to be a perennial playoff team. That's fun. That's great. We want to compete. Like we want to be, a perennial contender. We know we're 5 years away from that. And so what does it look like to build this team towards 5 years from now? I think is more what's on the mindset of probably the front office as well. Like, no disrespect to Indiana, but we don't want to be the Pacers. We don't want to make the playoffs year after year after year and just be happy to be there. And what's really cool about this front office is that's what they've said. Like they've said, we're not just in this to, we don't want to, just have a competition trophy. Like you made it. We want to win the whole dang thing. And so we know we're 5 years away from that. And so I think this front office is going to start looking what pieces do we need to add, not necessarily to make us good this year, which I think there will be some pieces in the offseason that make us better, but it's still that long term, when Paolo and Franz are in their prime 5 years from now, what should the team around them look like? So I think that's kind of what the front office will be looking at. Does that mean a big splash this summer? I don't know. Maybe we're going to have some money to throw around depending on what we do with our current guys. But I think the Quickley thing is totally legitimate thinking there from Knicks fans. And again, it's been a name that the Magic fans have mentioned as well.
I personally hope you don't add Immanuel Quickley to the core.
Of course.
Because it means he's not with the Knicks anymore, although we'll see what the Knicks obviously do in the future. So I have some specific roster questions, and they are Paolo and Franz related.
Yeah.
And going through some of the numbers on them this season. And look, that's why I want to talk to somebody that's actually watched every minute that the Magic have played, because the Paolo on-off for this year, they're about even in his minutes. It's a little. They've been outscored a little bit in the 2,000 possessions he's played. It's like negative 0.7, which is like they're about even. Like right. when he's on the court, when he's off, it's like plus 11, and he doesn't have the shot profile or even just the profile in general of someone where this should be that drastic. Now you hinted at it that their bench has just been outscoring guys. And if you look at all of for the Knicks fan that doesn't know, all of their highest on-off guys are like Joe Ingles and Gary Harris and Jonathan
Wagner
Isaac
might be on there. Yeah.
It's very much their bench guys. Now, the one thing that, so I'm not completely discrediting the lineup data that I'm pointing to, but I'm recognizing that this very much feels like that first Knicks season where like the starting lineup was like just break even and then we'll win the games with our bench. The thing that I guess would concern me just from an outside looking in is the efficiency. Now I see that he's shooting 69% from the line this year, still getting there 7 times a game. Is that if you're going to complain about anything with Paolo as a Magic fan, is that the biggest worry, that he's just not that efficient a player at the moment?
100%. That's exactly it. And that was his issue last season during his rookie season. And you expect that from a rookie, especially a rookie who's instantly become the focal point of an offense, coming into his first season in the league. And so we were hoping to see a little bit of an improvement in that department, for him this season. And in some ways, I'd say we have. He was very inefficient last season, but especially over this last 10-game stretch, 11-game stretch, the inefficiencies kind of piled up. It's kind of crazy because in that stretch, he's also had some of his best games. Like he dropped 42 against Cleveland a couple weeks ago during this, 11-game down stretch. Career high, but we lost that game, so it's been one of those things, kind of talking about this whole team and the makeup of this team. One of the most frustrating parts for Magic fans this season, not just during the win streak or this, down stretch, the whole season has been, it's been crazy, Andrew. Paolo and Franz are incapable of having a good night at the same night. It's just like one of those things. Like Paolo will have a great night. He'll shoot, 75% from the field. He'll make, 8 of 9 from the line, and Franz is 3 of 12, it's one of those things. And they'll switch roles the next night. It's just like, I can count on one hand over the 30 games, the nights where both of those guys have shot the ball well, have played well. And of course we win those games. Like when those two guys are on together, we win, but it's just, for whatever reason, they can't click on the same night, unfortunately. But, so that's been a frustration. The thing with Paolo, again, going back to him, is just, we always have to remind ourselves, he just turned 21. a month ago. He's, a 30 games into his second season. There's a lot of growing pains there. We're still obviously beyond excited about him. Like, he has the physical traits that are needed. He has the IQ that's needed. And so it's not necessarily a worry. We know it's growing pains. And again, just like I said, we're in this for the long game. Making the playoffs this year would be fun. Making the play-in would be fun, but we're in it for the long game. And we really think Paolo can bring us there.
So, what's interesting from a Knicks perspective? We have a guy named RJ Barrett who has not been the most efficient player in his career. Doesn't live at the line the way that Paolo does, but the one thing RJ can do from an elite perspective is get to the rim. He just is able to get inside the paint to get shots at the rim. Has not been the most efficient in those shots at the rim throughout his career, but if you go to effective field goal percentage as a metric, we're begging for the first year that RJ shoots above 50% effective field goal percentage. And Paolo, just barely after the most recent stretch you're talking about, cracked underneath that. You mentioned the Franz of it all and how they don't seem to have a good game together. I've never done it before and actually tracked how Julius and RJ do. Have they ever had a couple of good games together? How many times they've both had good, efficient games? But that seems to be the belief that the Knicks fans, and maybe myself included, have, that Julius and RJ don't exactly mesh well together. The 3-point percentage is obviously the thing I'm going to point out with Franz Wagner. Normally around a 35-36% 3-point shooter. The volume's up. He's taking his most amount of threes for his career, and he's shooting 27% from three. Now, you tell me, is it as drastic a drop off? Was there a rough stretch that he went through, and otherwise you take out the rough stretch, the number's actually not that bad? Or has that been as drastic a concern, seeing him kind of fall off a cliff from a 3-point perspective?
It has been. We're almost in concern territory. 30 games in now, it's not, there wasn't a certain stretch. Last year, Paolo shot 2.5% from three in February. It was awful. Paolo was terrible in February. That bombed his whole, field goal percentage, 3-point percentage over the season. That has not been the case with Franz. It has been consistently bad for 30 games, which again is so surprising because one of his calling cards, one of the things that made him so great over his first 2 seasons in the league was his efficiency, both at the rim, from distance. Not that he's a knockdown 3-point shooter necessarily, but for the role that he plays as a 6'10" forward who gets to the rim and can also step outside for three, they were efficient numbers. But across the board, not just, 3-point shooting, even at the rim, he was known as a very good finisher at the rim, right hand, left hand. And for whatever reason this season, he has not been able to take another step. And so it's a little bit of an odd one because, you'd like to see that third year progression, especially this summer. He played for Germany, in the World Cup, won the whole dang thing with him and his brother Mo Wagner, which was a lot of fun for Magic fans. And he played so well. And so part of it was when he came in after the offseason was he just gassed from, spending, 6 weeks with that team, and he'd slowly ramp into it. But here we are, like we said, 30 games in the season, and we're just not seeing that normal efficiency from Franz. And so, again, we're right on the line of concern, for me, as we, it's crazy. We're 11 games away from the halfway point of the season. So I still think he'll be able to turn it on at some point. But yeah, it's definitely been a concern. It has really, really hurt this team, genuinely, especially when you talk about the volume. There have been nights where he, hasn't had it, which is frequently, unfortunately. And most of the time you're shooter's got to shoot. He's got to shoot his way out of it. And it just hasn't happened. He's still shooting, not knocking him down. It's hurting the team. I'm a big Franz believer, so I'm not worried yet, but it's definitely been an issue for this team so far.
Yeah, I don't know if I specifically said the number, but he's shooting 27% from three this year
on a high volume.
4.8 attempts, which is his highest of his career. It's one of the highest on the Magic too, which for a team that doesn't take a ton of threes, for one of your highest to be that inefficient from three can, like you said, be a problem or at least concerning, which we may be reaching that point. What isn't a concern, if you want to talk specifically about this matchup, is the bench unit that you were talking about. So if you want to give Knicks fans a bit of an idea of a script for how this game might go, I'm telling you, there's going to be Knicks fans listening to this being like, oh yeah, that's the 2021 season. We remember how that year went. So if you want to, is it literally just going to be survive, play even with the starters, and then the bench will come in and blitz you?
Well, here's the issue, though, right now. And part of the reason why we've struggled over the last week is our bench is not healthy. That's going to be the issue on Friday.
Wow.
So Jonathan Isaac has missed, I believe, the last 3 or 4 games. Joe Ingles has missed the last 6 or 7 games. Gary Harris missed last night's game, Wednesday's game against Philly. All 3 of those guys, very key components of this bench unit. So I actually don't know who's going to be available on Friday. We're expecting Joe Ingles to be back any game now. He sprained his ankle. I think it was 6 games ago. I expect him to be back any day, so he may play Friday, which, by the way, Joe Ingles has been a little bit of a surprise for Magic fans. Really quick, I'll just talk about this.
No, go ahead. I'm staring at the on-off. He is their best on-off on
It's crazy.
Second best behind Gogo Batate, but he's been a revelation, it looks like.
It's crazy because as I mentioned, this team has struggled 3-point shooting for the last several years. And so we sign a guy like Joe Ingles, and we expect he'll just come in off the bench and help bring our 3-point percentage up. We'll maybe hang out in the corner and Paolo kick out to him or whatever. And instead, he has fulfilled a similar role that he had in Utah, where he becomes like a primary ball handler when he's on the floor. And his pick and rolls with him and Mo Wagner, usually is the big who's on the floor with him, are elite. They're crazy. Like it's unbelievable. Like this dude is so slow. He walks around like it's funny. The young guys on this team, I'll call him like a substitute teacher. I was like, that's what Joe Ingles looks like. So they all clown him about that. And he's out there just, cutting up defenses with, this pick and roll and all this kind of stuff. And so he's been a revelation that I certainly didn't expect, which has been really fun. But again, I don't know if he'll be available on Friday against the Knicks. We talked about Gary Harris. Gary Harris has been actually probably the most disappointing member of that bench so far this season, which again is very surprising. A career around 40% 3-point shooter this season has really struggled from deep, which again is a testament to maybe how this bench could actually be better down the stretch if he can figure it out. But as far as the rest of the bench unit, Mo Wagner tends to be one of the sparks there on the bench as the typical backup center. Just a pure offensive center. Like he's not going to give you a lot on defense, but he can step back and hit the 3. He can get to the rim and finish all kinds of different ways. Mm-hmm. But as far as like you said, a script, it's pretty much like that, especially against the good teams, which the Knicks, I definitely would consider that. The starters will try to keep it afloat. And again, it depends on who's playing well. If it's Franz or Paolo, whoever's going to lead the charge with that. And then the second unit, depending on who's healthy, has been outscoring opponent benches pretty consistently this season. Cole Anthony, I almost forgot to mention him, of course. Cole Anthony, another true spark plug off the bench, the sixth man for the Orlando Magic. But again, over this 10-11 game stretch has been wildly inconsistent, whereas the first 20 games, he was an early candidate for sixth man of the year. I don't want to say he was a leader or anything like that, but he was at least in conversation. So again, typically that would be the script, but I really don't know who's going to be available Friday. Joe Ingles might be back. Gary Harris, I would expect to be back. Jonathan Isaac, another guy I didn't mention, another defensive anchor, has been out, like I said, 4 to 5 games now with all kinds of just another guy that's just so injury prone, the most random injuries. And they wrap him in bubble wrap, dude. Like anytime it's just the tiniest little knock, he's out 2 or 3 games and we all roll our eyes. So again, it depends on who's available Friday. We'll see. But if everyone's healthy, that would exactly be the script, like you mentioned.
So the 4-man unit, the 4-man lineup, if I could just point to them, of Joe Ingles, Jonathan Isaac, Cole Anthony, and Mo Wagner in 260 possessions this year has a plus 14 on off point differential. It's the 97th percentile. They're in the 74th percentile in points per possession at 119.2. So they're in the top 25% of the league offensively. Now let's go to defense. They're in the 98th percentile, top 2% of the league in defense, 105.2 points per 100 possessions they're allowing. That's elite. That's a thing that you could build a 9-game over 500 record with if your bench is doing that. That 4-man unit featuring guys that I don't believe any of these guys have a start this year that I just mentioned. The Joe Ingles doesn't have a start. No. Mo Wagner doesn't have a start. Cole Anthony doesn't have a start. Yeah, all 4 of these guys have not started a game. Jonathan Isaac doesn't have a start.
Right.
So, all right, Knicks fans, you've heard it here first. The Jonathan Isaac is currently day-to-day. Gary Harris is day-to-day. And Joe Ingles is currently listed as out. I guess we'll see what happens for the Knicks game on Friday. But that look, the Knicks are coming off a pretty frustrating loss to OKC. The day after, I'm trying to put into context that OKC team is really good, and losing to them shouldn't be as disappointing as it is. It's more the process of like I don't know if you saw what happened, but like Immanuel Quickley was just like flat out their best player in the game last night. They're overall both ends of the floor just doing great things. And he got taken out with 4 minutes left to play RJ Barrett, who I'd argue was their worst player on the floor last night, which, I mean, there's a bit of an RJ Barrett conversation going on in New York at the moment, which now I want to hand the floor over to you. Two things before I let you get out of here. I like to give my guest a chance to ask a question about the Knicks, give their thoughts on the Knicks. So please, Kevin, your questions or thoughts about the Knicks so far this season.
Yeah, if I were to pick one thing, I've watched the Knicks from afar this season. Obviously, I've seen the couple games where Jalen Brunson has just been outstanding. So like, that's a lot of fun. I've always been a Jalen Brunson fan, whether it was Dallas or New York. I think he's an incredible player. I guess I'm kind of curious, like what you think the ceiling is for this team this season, like with a guy like Jalen Brunson. Obviously, you mentioned RJ Barrett. You know, maybe the ups and downs that he brings with this team, but where do you think they fall? Obviously, the elite of the elite in the Eastern Conference, Boston. I think Milwaukee will be there as well. I know they're climbing right now. I don't know if Philadelphia will be elite in the playoffs. I guess we'll see. Do you think the Knicks could potentially make another run to the Eastern Conference Finals? They could get to the second round and knock off one of those teams. Like, do you think this team is built, really for a playoff run like that, or what do you think maybe the ceiling could be for this team?
I think my expectations going into this season, especially after a week before the season, literally the weekend before training camp, Milwaukee got Dame and the Celtics got Drew Holiday. And my expectations changed to maybe we could be a sneaky conference finals team to, win a playoff round, make a second round and make it competitive. Like, don't get swept by Boston. Don't get swept by Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Be competitive in the second round and show the league we are actually a player away. And it doesn't have to be a franchise altering player. You could shore up one position, one player, and maybe you're closer. And I don't think that's changed. I think they're right there with the Magic for around the 4 seed. And I think if you're hosting a playoff series and say it's a Knick Magic first round, you win that series, you advance to the second round, you lose in 6 or 7 to Boston or Milwaukee. That's a respectable way this season could go. Because while I don't subscribe to the way the Knicks are talked about on the national shows, and it's is Jalen Brunson a 1 or a 1A? No, blah, blah, blah. I do think what they are doing is, out kicking their coverage based off of the talent on their team. As far as the ceiling is concerned, there are little things there's a belief that if Quickley was playing more, and I've honestly just been internally wrestling with what if Immanuel Quickley did play 30 minutes a game? Would they be 20 and 10 at the moment? Would they actually be that much better? Or what are the games I point to where him not playing more, cost them? I do think there's 2-3 games where he got 21 or 22 minutes and it was yeah, you probably should have played him over RJ Barrett. You mentioned that the Magic are in a not in a prove it year. And I think the Knicks are in a last gasp, let's see what this team is. And I would be shocked if one significant roster change doesn't happen this offseason. Now, losing Mitchell Robinson hurts. Mitchell Robinson is out for the year, it seems. So the one elite thing that they really had outside of Jalen Brunson's shooting was his offensive rebounding. And that's just disappeared from the equation. But I think they could survive offensively with Isaiah Hartenstein and whatever. The move I think they're going to make is to trade for a backup center. And, I think my expectations remain the same. Get to a second round, win at least 5 to 6 playoff games this upcoming year. And that I'll be content with what this season is. And, that at least to me will be the success that a season can be.
Yeah, that feels about right with where, again, from the distance, I've kind of viewed this team. And I think that's kind of interesting. When you talk about Quickley and him not maybe playing as many minutes as you'd like, who potentially, who is taking those minutes from him? Is it RJ Barrett really that's kind of taking those minutes?
We can talk about RJ. I hesitate because it's just it's almost impossible. We've lost the plot with what this RJ Barrett thing has been, where he's been one of the more inefficient players in the NBA based on his usage to start his career. and so many excuses have been made for him. And I want to give a shout out to the Strickland, one of the Knicks niche content sites that's out there. And one of their guys in their postgame show last night pointed out about RJ, like, it's not the same as Julius or Jalen, where like the getting to the rim and getting into the paint is a skill, but they kick out more often than RJ does. And while like both of them can have tunnel vision, both Julius Randle and Brunson, they're at least elite in their making at the rim and their shots in the paint, that you excuse it to an extent. Yes, there may be a guy open in the corner when they're in the paint and they're surrounded by two guys, but they make enough tough shots that you're like, okay, you excuse it. RJ doesn't have that accuracy at the rim yet to excuse not hitting guys that are wide open on the wing. And statistically, based on his usage at the rim, he's actually one of the lowest in the NBA for kickouts or passes out of shots when he gets to the rim.
Wow.
So this is different. He got off to this 7-game stretch. And Kevin, like, this may have to be how we talk about his season. Like, Julius Randle's numbers overall aren't like eye popping if you just went to like ESPN.com and looked up his stats for the year. That's like, all right, he's scoring a little bit less. His efficiency is a little bit down. You know, you'd argue he's having a worse year than last year. He got off to the worst 6-game start to a season of anybody in the last 20 years. I'm not like, that is statistic. He was shooting 12% from 3 through 6 games, 26, I think 19% even at one point from the field. He was that bad.
Wow.
Since then, he's having his best year as a pro. Like, it's just flat out. He's been that good.
Wow.
So if you eliminate those 6 games, he's been the best he's been as a Knick. RJ Barrett got off to the best 7-game start of his career this year. Then he went out with a couple of, he had a migraine issue and he got sick and then he sat out a couple games. And since he's come back, it's his worst season as a pro. The only thing that's gotten better is his free throw shooting. And even that started to come down a little bit. So, like, if you just eliminate the beginning of those seasons, RJ's having his worst year of his career. Julius is having the best year of his career.
Wow.
And I wonder if we ever reach a tipping point with RJ where, like, that's the minutes you have to go to for Quickley to get to where he needs to be. They have a lot of wings. Like, Quentin Grimes played well last night, played 11 minutes. Dante DiVincenzo has a above 60 effective field goal percentage and like can only play 19 to 20 minutes last night. He's averaging 20. So like the RJ minutes going down would actually lead to better players minutes going up, which I think is the thing a lot of people are eventually clamoring for. The issue that I don't envy Tom Thibodeau having to figure out and this front office figure out is like, the moment you decide RJ Barrett's minutes go down is the moment his trade value just disappears. I would counter to them and to anybody making that argument that, man, I think playing him is actually making his trade value go down because people can see what he looks like when he's playing 30 minutes. So like this isn't going to happen Friday night, but I do wonder if like there is a future bench role for RJ Barrett where he's started every game of his career, it seems. And he may just be better off as like a 6th man at a certain point. And if Andrew Wiggins can go to the bench and they're like a guy helped the team win a title, I don't think RJ Barrett's above going to the bench. So those are my thoughts on the matter at the moment. I'm literally just using data, RJ Hive. I'm not saying he's awful or he's ass, even though the data would actually suggest that.
Right.
It's not a lost cause. I personally just wonder if they're just better options than him at literally at all times.
Right.
So that's my thoughts on thoughts on it. Yeah. Anyway, I hope I gave you a good picture of where the things currently stand.
That's very helpful. Yeah, I know it's always been an interesting, kind of situation up there with him, where I always get the feeling he's beloved by Knicks fans, and yet hasn't quite hit the goal that all Knicks fans have had for him. But you're still cheering him on. You want him to get there, but it seems like maybe the time is taking a little bit on him.
He is the most polarizing player I've ever watched for this franchise.
Wow,
most polarizing player because the highs. Like when the highs exist, there's a process to it. Like that's what this first 7 games was. It was so encouraging because the process was there. He wasn't just like hitting shots. He was making the right passes. He was rebounding. He was defending. He was all of the above, the star J Barrett that people pointed to. And I was like, you know what? If this is here to stay, I'm all for it. I can't wait to see a month from now if this is still here. Again, take out those first 7 games. He's having the worst season of his career.
Wow. That's rough.
So, yeah. So, well, we could transition to the last question I have for you. I know I kept you longer than expected, but whoa, that fell.
No, this is good.
But the last question I got for you is, I've done this with everybody. I hinted at earlier, the Mount Rushmore of Magic rivals. I like to circle the calendar when or certain dates on the calendar when it comes out. Obviously, the Miami Heat would absolutely be one for me. The Boston Celtics would be for a lot of people. The Pacers this year for Knicks fans, between the long history of the Knicks-Pacers rivalry and obviously Obi Toppin getting traded to the Pacers. So I'm curious, for a Magic fan, or you on behalf of Magic fans, or just you personally, who are the 4 teams that you circle when the calendar comes out at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, so the first one is a little bit sad, but it is Miami. So Miami is certainly our biggest rival. Obviously, in-state rival. It's always going to be that way. Yeah. But, Magic fans are aware we are the little brother. Okay. Like we know, like we accept that for now. We think someday maybe we can pass them, but obviously they've got the rings. We don't. All those kinds of things. They have obviously the bigger market. Miami's a much bigger place, bigger fan base and all that kind of stuff. So, but certainly they are the top. Like we want to beat Miami every time. But again, it's a little bit sad because we know like we're the little bro. It just is what it is. Every once in a while we can beat our little bro. But it is still a rival for us. And if you ask Heat fans, they'll probably roll their eyes. That's the part that hurts the worst, because it's like Orlando, whatever. But we still want to beat them. They're number 1. Number 2 is kind of interesting. If I had to pick a number 2 this season, and this is not a long-term rivalry, this is just this season, it's actually the Boston Celtics, which is a little bit odd. Okay. Because here's what happened though. Last season, we got off to that bad start, 5-20. One of the things that helped claw us out of this, we had a 6-game win streak last year. And when we beat the Celtics twice in Boston over one weekend in December, and then we beat them again later in the season, and we beat them again to start the season this year. We went on a 4-0 run against the Boston Celtics as a mediocre team. I mean, we beat them up for 4 straight games. And it was a lot of fun for the Magic, and the Celtics did not like it. Like the Celtics players were talking about it. Eddie House, on their broadcast, was talking about how they were losing to this trash team in Orlando. And that just kept fueling the Magic players who heard Eddie House talk about them as trash and all those kinds of things. So it ended up going on this 4-0 run to beat them. Then the Celtics brought us back down to earth a couple weeks ago, and they kicked us around pretty good at home in Boston. I mean, but for the last 2 seasons, that has been a surprising rivalry where both these teams have been wanting to beat each other. The Celtics fans didn't like that this tiny team from Orlando was beating them. So that's been fun. If I were to add a couple others, Toronto is one, which is a little bit odd as well. What I'm about to say is not an opinion of Knicks Film School. It's an opinion of myself. Toronto fans are weird. I'll just go ahead and say it. Like Raptors fans are really weird. Don't come at them for that. Come at me. Like there's this whole thing from the 2021 draft where they draft Scotty Barnes. We draft Jalen Suggs. There's this video that went semi-viral amongst the Raptors fans of myself and Jonathan Osborne of the 6 Man Show cheering. We were so pumped when the Raptors took Scotty Barnes. Not because we didn't like Scotty Barnes. I'm a diehard Florida State fan. I love Scotty Barnes. He's a great player. He's been great. We just didn't need another wing. We were sure Scotty Barnes was going to fall to us. We'd have to add another wing to our roster. It was a mess. So when Jalen Suggs fell to us, we were thrilled. And so ever since then, Raptors fans still go watch that video on YouTube. They still share it on TikTok and all kinds of crazy things. They come at us saying, you guys look like idiots and all that kind of stuff. And so it's become a weird thing. Like the Raptors fans have become obsessed with the Magic fans and with the 6 Man Show in particular. So that's been strange. They're a bunch of weirdos, but that I'd put them at number 3. And then the 4th one, I don't know. I don't know if I'd call this a rivalry, but when you talk about games that I circle on the calendar, it's actually Oklahoma City. Which we haven't played yet. We're really excited to play them here in a couple weeks. The reason being is that's a team that we feel like, while we're not there on their level yet, the makeup and the projection going forward is very similar. Like we feel like I talked about in 5 years in the finals, we think we could play Oklahoma City. Like that's a team, if we were to make it in 5 years, that's a team we know we'd come up against. And then you also add the fact that, you had Chet and Jalen Suggs, 2 Gonzaga guys, they're BFFs and all that kind of stuff. Coming up against them will be fun. So that's another team I think that I would circle. So those are my 4 for this season in particular. Miami, Boston, Toronto, and then OKC. Different reasons for each of those, but those are kind of the teams that I circled when the schedule came out.
So there's 2 teams that I would have assumed from my outsider perspective would at least be I thought potentially would have made it. I know from talking with with the six-man show last year, how much of an affection there still is for Vooch. So I was wondering if Chicago was part of the conversation.
Yeah, so Chicago was a part of the conversation before this year. The reason being is we still owned some of their draft picks, and so we wanted to beat them every single stinking time.
Got it.
That whole Vooch trade, came to an end this past offseason. We used up our last Chicago draft pick, which we just absolutely fleeced them in that trade. That was up until this season certainly one, but now the draft, the trade stuff is over. We still love Vucevic. I mean, he said on our show he wants to come back and finish, his career in Orlando, which we'd love to see. But as far as a rivalry goes, it's not really there anymore, at least for Magic fans. Obviously we want to beat them, but the whole draft stock thing isn't a thing anymore.
And then the last one, I wonder if there's some history to this rivalry, but the Lakers between, I don't mean to bring up bad memories, but losing in the finals to them in 2009, Dwight going there, Shaq going there. Where do the Lakers stand with Magic fans these days?
I don't know if I'd call it a rivalry. We just hate them, we just hate them. It's just one of those things like, it always makes me sick. And I know the Lakers don't like the Knicks, the Knicks don't like the Lakers either. It's like, it always feels like the rich get richer, It's just one thing after another, great team after great team. And it just gets old. It gets annoying. And you're right, especially at the expense of the Magic, losing Shaq and losing Dwight and then losing to them in the finals before Dwight went over there. But yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know if I call it a rivalry again, because it's so one-sided, but we just hate them. We just hate them. And it's always fun to beat them. And whenever we get the chance to do that, which we've done pretty well against them at home over the last several seasons. But it kind of is what it is. So I don't know if I call it a rivalry. We just don't like them. It's one of those things.
I guess there would need to be something reciprocated from the Lakers for it to be a rivalry. But as far as, teams that you despise, the Lakers are toward the top of that list. The last question I have, because I know this is very Magic specific, I think I'm going to ask this every single time I have someone different that is a Magic fan on this podcast. If they could retire one number tomorrow, who would it be? Who would your first choice be to be the first player to get their number retired by the Magic?
Yeah, it's not going to be a name that most national folks or other team people, think of. For most Magic fans, it's actually a guy named Nick Anderson. I don't know if you remember Nick Anderson.
Oh, of course I remember Nick Anderson.
Nick Anderson, the team's first draft pick back in 1989, played for the team for 10 years, still leads in a bunch of, statistical categories, games played and those kinds of things, and is still with the team. He's been with the team, ever since he, retired from the NBA after being with Orlando. Came back to Orlando, has been with the team ever since in like a community ambassador role. He's at every game. He's walking around saying hi to everybody. I mean, he is Mr. Orlando Magic for Magic fans. And so he doesn't have all the eye-popping stats and all-star appearances of a Shaq, a Dwight, a Penny, T-Mac, whoever. But for most Magic fans, if that ever happens, he should be first. Now, the front office, or not the front office, sorry, the ownership has come out and said, we're not retiring any jerseys until we win a title. And whoever, leads us to that, they'll get their jersey retired, all this kind of stuff. We have a Hall of Fame, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if it'll ever happen, but if it does, it should be Nick Anderson first, foremost, without any question. In most Magic fans, my true Magic fans, they would say Nick Anderson. That's my pick.
That makes me happy. We were talking last night on our post game show about like great big threes in NBA history, and like we went to Shaq, Penny, and Nick Anderson, and I was like, that was really a big two. But like when Horace Grant went there, he kind of became the big three. There were certain nights where Dennis Scott was the third best player on that team. But that was really like Shaq, Penny, and a third.
Yeah.
And, Nick Anderson, I think, kind of gets lost to time nationally because of the free throws in the 95 finals.
Yeah.
And it makes me happy that all these years later, the way he's remembered in Orlando is not his lowest career moment, but as an ambassador for a franchise and a fan base that seems to love him and want his number to get retired above all these other Hall of Famers,
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing with those free throws, like obviously he's got to make those, but the thing with that is that wasn't like a game 7, series on the line. That was so early. I still think Houston would have won the series. Like it just is what it is. So most Magic fans have moved on from that. Yeah, we still get the little, jabs in every once in a while, but all in all, you can't take 2 free throws versus a decade of a career of playing. And then now we're looking at almost 20 years of him being around the organization after, his career. And so, yeah, you got to take the almost 30 years of the good versus the 2 free throws of the bad. And so we haven't had a lot of guys, Andrew, that have stuck with this franchise through a lot. That's part of why we love Vooch, because he was an all-star and just stuck through it all. And Nick Anderson was one of those guys. Again, he's been around this franchise. He loves the community. And so for those reasons, he is like Mr. Orlando Magic to most of us. And so I would pick him first.
Well, that's a very rational, very reasonable way to look at it. And I don't think Knicks fans are very rational or reasonable. So I think that the New Yorker in us, unfortunately, comes out, or we want to fire everybody into the sun. So it's a very heartwarming perspective, at least from my standpoint. Anyway, Kevin, this has been great. Thank you for joining me for a pretty lengthy edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. Before you get out of here, plug what you'd like to plug to our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to find more Orlando Magic content, you can follow us at Six Man Show on all social platforms. We also, post all our episodes to YouTube and stuff. So if you want to come watch us react to this game on Friday, you can join us there. We also do a post game show like you guys, which is our first year doing this live post game show. We started this year. I actually host that. So we'll be doing that obviously after Friday's game. So after you watch Knicks Film School, their post-game show, why don't you come over and hang out with us on YouTube, later. But anyway, yeah, six-man show everywhere. And big shout out to you, Andrew, and the whole, Knicks Film School crew. You guys play like a different sport than us. Like the big markets, the little markets, you guys are crazy. Like the output you do and like the numbers you get are crazy, but you're always so gracious with your time. Like we've picked your brain on several occasions over the last year or two as we kind of start our rise to essentially, in the league. Our show has kind of gone alongside with the team, which is fun. But you've always been gracious with your time and your insight, in helping us out. So definitely appreciate you, and thanks for having me on.
Of course. Happy to have you on. Happy to help out any way I could. And I got to be honest, watching the Magic go on their run earlier this year, when they built the 14-5 record during that winning streak, there was a part of me that was happy it was happening because I knew it meant your show was probably doing well.
Yeah.
Covering a team that was worthy of the quality that I believe your show is. So hopefully it continues, just not on Friday against the Knicks.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, there you go. Kevin, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Andrew.